It's not often that I give up something for Lent, but this year it became pretty obvious to me that certain things were taking up a significant amount of my time with nothing to show for it. So I decided to give up, or at least curtail, my use of social media and the news. It's been extremely challenging. I belong to several groups on social media. Some of these groups are clergy groups, others are artist groups, and I need these groups for the resources that they provide. So giving them up completely would not be very helpful. So I decided that my Lenten practice would not be one of total abstinence, but rather one of significant reduction. Now, I don't know about anyone else, but for me, abstinence is always much easier than trying to limit myself. I can easily abstain from opening a bag of chips, but to open a bag and just have 1 or 2 chips, that is pure torture. Nevertheless, there have been more days than not where I've done really well with limiting my time on the internet. Of course, there have been other days that I could have done a whole lot better, but throughout my struggle, I have noticed myself getting better at it, and I have even managed to reclaim a large quantity of my time. And that is a very, very good thing. But I've also noticed some other benefits, and these are the real gems of my practice. For instance, I've noticed that I notice things better. Since I removed everything from my phone, there's no real reason to look at it unless it rings or there's a text message. And that has been a lot like emerging into the open air after spending a long period of time underground. The air is sweeter, the sun is brighter, colors are more vibrant, and I notice so much more when I am looking up and around rather than down. The greatest benefit, however, has been the return to normalcy. You've heard the saying that no news is good news. It's absolutely true. No news is good news, at least most of what constitutes news today. Because most of our daily news is not actually news. Most of it is scandal and gossip, and opinion about the scandal and the gossip. Most of our daily news provides directives about how to think, what to be upset about, and who to hate. If you lean to the right, the news you listen to targets those on the left. And if you lean to the left, the news you listen to targets those on the right. And that's mostly what it's come down to. So my discipline has been to scan the headlines once a day, just enough to make sure that the sky hasn't fallen out of the galaxy, but I don't read the articles. I just don't. And my life has returned to normal. That terrible sense of dread and mistrust has all but vanished. Of course, I still don't like the corruption and corrosion that permeates our government, but those daily feelings of doom and gloom are gone. And I notice for the first time in a while that nothing around me has changed. The sun still rises in the east and sets in the west. The school buses still roar past my house at 7:30 every morning. Gas prices may have gone up or down a dime or two, but it still costs about the same to fill my tank. I still bring home a paycheck. I still have a place to call home. Nothing around me has changed. Yet, just a couple of months ago, I thought the end of the world was just around the corner because that's what everything I read told me to think. I don't know when it became a thing, but visions of the world coming to an end have preoccupied human civilizations for a very long time. Yet here we are. Even Jesus thought about it quite a bit. especially in those last few days in Jerusalem right before he was executed. And this parable of the bridesmaids is but one example of his thoughts. It doesn't make much sense to our modern day ears. In fact, it seems to contradict nearly everything he said in his famous Sermon on the Mount, not to mention it makes mincemeat out of the Beatitudes. Therefore, I tell you, do not worry about your life, what you will eat or what you will drink, or about your body, what you will wear. Worry about your oil. That's the main thing. Worry about whether you have enough for you and forget about everyone else. They are not your problem. Or, do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth where moth and rust consume and where thieves break in and steal. But do make sure you have plenty of oil on hand. Or, in everything, do unto others as you would have them do to you in everything that is, except for oil, which changes all the rules. I mean, wouldn't it have been more consistent for Jesus to compare God's kingdom to 5 wise bridesmaids who shared their oil so that all 10 would get to meet the bridegroom at midnight? He could have still made his point that no one knows for sure when the Son of Man will come, while also highlighting the need for each of us to take care of one another while we wait. Maybe he thought of that later. I know there have been a lot of Mondays where I have come up with the perfect way to express my sermon from the previous Sunday. Maybe later, Jesus thought to himself, I really should have changed that story so my disciples would know how easy it would have been for those girls to just help their neighbors. Maybe, but I digress. The 25th chapter of Matthew is a continuation of a conversation that began in chapter 24 with Jesus' comment that the temple would be destroyed. Jesus' disciples, who were probably in a state of shock, naturally wanted to know more. When are all these things you're talking about going to happen, and how will we know that they're about to happen? The problem is, this parable was recorded some 60 years after the fact, and the book of Matthew is the only place that it shows up. By the time Matthew wrote his gospel, expectations of Jesus' imminent return were undergoing some pretty serious recalculations, and Matthew's parables are, for the most part, appeals to the community to keep the faith, to confess Christ, and to wait expectantly for his return, even though it had already been delayed well beyond what the first generation of believers had anticipated. So Matthew has Jesus wrap up his parable with a stern warning to stay awake and wait in hope, for none of us knows the day nor the hour of the Son of Man's return. Were you listening carefully? This hit me like a brick this week. Jesus does not mention oil, nor the wisdom or folly of those who bring extra or those who don't. His critique is for those who fall asleep. And you remember verse 5? As the bridegroom was delayed, all of them became drowsy and slept. This parable is not so much about being prepared as it is about staying awake and waiting in hope. So I don't know, maybe all that business with the oil was to see who was still awake and paying attention. Whatever the original point was behind the oil story, it's lost. We can only speculate, and we should, because here we are 2,000 years later, still focusing on making sure that we have enough oil and allowing ourselves to be lulled to sleep by machinery. Dark times come to every generation. Our present age is characterized by the unrest of terrorist attacks, unrelenting war, economic instability, and environmental destruction. And have you noticed how many novels, movies, and television shows there are about the apocalypse? Have you noticed how the news news and the media are getting all kinds of mileage out of that? Have you noticed lately that the world feels more dangerous, that our streets seem less safe, that the assault on our values is constant? The threats feel real, don't they? It feels like everything is coming apart at the seams, and any day now it's all going to end. Maybe it will, maybe it won't, but for today, nothing has changed. The sun still rises in the east and sets in the west, just as it always has. The only difference is we are so absorbed with what the newscasters and the social media have to say about things that we miss the ways that God is still acting and still speaking today in the beautiful here and now. This world has all sorts of problems, and there are a lot of people who are suffering. But when we are distracted by worrying about it, we miss precious opportunities to actually do something about it, like working for the healing of the world, caring for the good earth that we've been given, and reaching out in compassion to a world that is physically and spiritually hungry. We cannot stop the deluge of information. We cannot still the voices of fear and insecurity, but we can turn off the machine. In the parable, there was much distraction with oil and lamps and running out to the store at midnight, and everyone fell asleep. But the real matter at hand was to stay awake, to pay attention, to notice the one standing outside the door, knocking, seeking, and asking to be let in. However much we may be anxious about what's going on around us, our faith reminds us that this is the day that the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it. The Bible tells us over and over and over again, do not fear, and then challenges us to work here on earth for the day of God's reign in its fullness, which is glimpsed in every moment of compassion, sharing, and justice. We don't know the hour or the day, but even as we trust that we will be with God one day, we can still taste the kingdom right here and now through the sweet goodness of generosity and love, and through caring and sharing the abundance with which we ourselves have been blessed. When we are awake and aware of the kingdom, we can't help but love God and worship God, rather than idolizing the false gods of modern culture like materialism, nationalism, and social media. Loving our neighbor leads us to greater compassion and a firm commitment to justice, to making this a different and better world for all of God's children. But this kind of love cannot happen if we are otherwise occupied by sitting around, wringing our hands, and scouring the news for the next disaster. It can only happen when we are actively and fully engaged in the present moment, trusting in a future that is in God's hands, even if the timing of that future is unknown to us. In this parable, I hear a loud and clear wake-up call. It beckons us to wake up to the fact that our faith is a celebration of the mystery and miracle of life in every moment, day or night. It challenges us to stay awake and to recognize God who comes to us through unexpected people, in unexpected places, and at unexpected times. God's love, mercy, compassion, and justice are right here. We come simply to receive the gift, to share it, and to cherish it every day and night in the sure and certain hope that for each one together in this community of faith, the best is still yet to come. May it be with you all according to God's word. Amen.